Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Every Side of Cyber, Building a Nation-Scale Quick Reaction Force, sponsored by Raytheon on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today, Ben Cotton, the President, CEO, and Founder of SciTech Services, Mark Orlando, the Chief Technology Officer for Cyber Protection Solutions at Raytheon, Dylan Owen, a Senior Manager for Cyber Services at Raytheon, and Dr. Shujane Thompson, a Vice President Partner with Cyber and Biometrics Practice at IBM. Before break, we were talking a lot about the process and what is cyber threat hunting and why does it matter and how does incident response fit into it. And Dylan, you brought up a very interesting point about use cases, and I want to dig into that just a little bit more, because one of the things I think frustrates non-cyber people is this idea of, well, just do this. And they don't really understand what this is. And so let's dig into that use case. When you talk about, make sure you have a use case for the data collect, go into that a little more detail and help me understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, sure. So again, it's what kind of data do you want to collect and what are you going to do with that data and how does it help you do incident response or threat hunting? So, for instance, if you're bringing in net flow data and there's a lot of different elements in that flow, and some of those aren't really that relevant or that useful from a threat hunting or an incident response perspective, don't collect those, right? Because the other part of the equation here is your SIM license nowadays is going to be done by the amount of data you're putting into it. So, if your license is only this big, but your data is this big, you have to make a tough choice anyway. So you might as well look at those things that are the most relevant to how your security operations work, the threats that you want to look for or be alerted on, and bring that data down to those. So if it doesn't fit into that use case of, I can use this data to either detect a threat automatically, or it won't be useful to me from an incident response perspective, don't collect it.
But don't I want to look at all the threats? Don't I want to protect everything?
Yeah, but not all data has the same level of value for doing that. Okay. Right?
So you mentioned a use case. Walk me through one, maybe a recent one, and obviously if you need to anonymize it, feel free.
Yeah, so we had a customer that, from a visibility perspective, they were bringing in just a ton of DNS traffic. And DNS traffic can be great from a threat hunting perspective, but they were just bringing in too much of it from too many other sources, right? And it was eating up their Splunk license and was making hunting actually harder because, the way DNS works internally, it has to go from hop to hop to hop to finally your external DNS server and then out, right? And so they were getting all of those internal hops and just too much data. And so what we ended up doing was taking out most of the internal hops and just using their external DNS, because from a threat hunting perspective, they were interested in what was going out my network, right? So those internal ones weren't really providing the level of relevancy that they needed.
So the threat was coming from the outside, not necessarily the inside, though you can have threats inside.
Right, and it was also trying to get back out, right? So once a computer gets compromised, right, they want to move on objectives and then exfiltrate data, and they need external DNS in order to do that. So all that internal DNS traffic, while it was mildly useful, from a complete usefulness against their licensing of their SIM, it was just too much. Okay. So once we pulled that out, not only did they gain licensing or capacity back on their SIM for other more relevant logs, but they got the stuff that was the most important to them, and it made them more quicker because they didn't have to wade through, the packet went from here to here to here to here. It was just, this was the part that was the most important, that external resolution, and they were able to find threats faster that way.
Well, I think this is a common challenge for most of the organization here, is you only have limited resources, okay, and limited tool sets or limited capacity to be able to ingest the data sets. I want to make sure I call to the caution here is that our threat environment is so dynamic. It changes, so rapidly. Even though at times when we, home into certain type of threat hunt, that we may have to sacrifice certain data sets. But I think this cannot be the norm, and this is what the challenges of doing the effective threat hunt here is, to have that agility to be able to ingest the necessary data at the right time. And so then we can gain that intelligence and insight to the current threat environment. I think another item is very important here is that even though we understand the threat, we will be able to design the countermeasure for overcoming that particular threat. The incident response really require the organization to understand what the nature of the countermeasure, so they can then deploy that countermeasure effectively as part of the incident response, if you would.
And if I might add on to that, to both Dylan and the doctor's comments here. There's the automatic collection of data by necessity requires an automatic correlation of the data. So from an example standpoint, we had a client that had a very good IDS system in place, and they were receiving IDS indicators. They had a compromise, but it was taking them 24 hours to correlate that IDS back to a person, back to a process, back to the endpoint on which it actually occurred. So it's about the right type of data. It's about the correlation of that data in an automated fashion. And it's also about search. So as we talk about hunting, at the very root of hunting is your ability to search across your network and to be able to do that very, very quickly. And it's not just about processes, and it's not just about network connections. It's also about what is existing on those hard drives, even down into the unallocated space of those hard drives. The more sophisticated actors can actually customize the addressing of their malware into the unpartitioned space on a hard drive. So a good hunting team not only has the automated collection piece, but also has the ability to pivot and then simultaneously ask very complex questions across their entire environment and get that data back extremely quickly.
If I can just add something briefly too, just to key in on some things that were said. I really want to call attention to this idea that there, I think, has been a fundamental shift in the last 10, 15 years from this idea that we need to collect everything because you don't know what's going to be useful at any given time, to now, modern IT enterprises, there is so much data, and it's computing is so ubiquitous now that to Dr. Thompson's point, you really do have to make sacrifices about what you're going to collect, make a cogent argument as to why you need to collect it, why you're going to make the investment to store it, process it, present it to a team. And I think we as service providers, consultants, analysts, in order to maintain credibility with our customers, we have to now be able to provide a level of transparency that, again, I think 10 to 15 years ago, we could all kind of hide behind this concept of threat hunting and security and incident response. It's this really complicated sort of magic that happens that the layperson just can't understand. That's no longer acceptable. So I think not only do you have to be able to make those decisions about what compromises you're going to make, you have to be able to explain those decisions. You have to be able to show value, show results for what you're getting.
Let me bring in Dr. Thompson, because one of the things you brought up on the last segment was this idea of AI, adding AI, machine learning capabilities, but also automation has now come up again. These are considered in many regards emerging technologies to the federal community and probably to the broader private sector. What role or what hope do we have or that these types of technologies will make threat hunting, I don't know about easier, but at least better, faster, maybe not even cheaper?
Right. I think the hope is there, and it's already proven, because as we already talked about, several of my peers here talk about the large amount of data and complexity of the data really is far beyond a human intelligence can process in time. So the velocity, the scale, right, and the accuracies. So we need to heavily leaning on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then also take it to the next level is artificial intelligence of the artificial intelligence, because once you run the first algorithms, you may find the most, so-called first-hand data. Having said all that, the data amount may not necessarily, triage into the actionable intelligence. And therefore, we're talking about artificial intelligence of the artificial intelligence. The automation apply in two ways. One is to leveraging the artificial intelligence to be able to expedite the filter of the common threat. So we can then automatically process those common threats with non-proven countermeasures. Then we can then leave the best people and the best resource to focusing on those abnormalities that require deeper hunting activities. And so to me, automation applied to both of the ruling out that 80% of the so-called noise level of the threat, and then allowing this 20% of the focus into this really challenging threat, require hunting resources to really spare the time and energy to find the final answers.
I really hope we're not going to get into the AI of AI as a new buzzword in the federal market. I hope you just didn't coin that. I'm gonna look at you. Ben, jump in as well, because when you talk about forensics, right, that's another level down of the data and understanding what you have. Where does the automation AI play a role there?
So automation and forensics, remember, we think forensics first on all this data collection. The analysis of that data, I like to think of it as weeding the wheat from the chaff, so that you can get 100% of your human capital gray matter focused on the problem very, very quickly. And I think there's a consensus here with the panel that human gray matter, as good as AI, as good as ML will get, human gray matter is never going to be eliminated from the equation. And so from a forensic standpoint, the automation, the AI, the ML is leveraged to sort that wheat from the chaff, get down to what's important very quickly and focus on that.
And really, Dylan, what Ben and Dr. Thompson are really talking about here is the people side, which we'll get to in a little bit, but the people have to have the time to look at the data that is most important, most complex. To me, we'll go back to your use cases. Is that happening? Do you see it with customers? Do you see it internally at Raytheon, that you're getting that to the right data to the right people?
Yeah, it's definitely starting to turn that way. They're making these types of decisions, using that automation to make your organization more efficient on those, that 80% of the more commodity level threats that you could use, an automated playbook, let's say, to do the remediation or deploy the countermeasure. And that adding that level of efficiency allows your team to then focus on those things. So, because you're never going to hire more people, right? You're never going to out-hire the threat. So how do you make yourselves, with the resources you have, that much more efficient so you have the time to focus on those things that, a hunt may take you 2, 3, 4 hours to actually complete, right? So how do you free up that time to do that when you have all these fire drills going on over here? And that's where the automation and AI and ML can help, is freeing your resources up. Because again, you're never going to hire 1,000 more people to tackle this problem in an organization.
And Mark, let me bring you in, because one of the things that, as we're kind of going through this, the automation, the AI, these tools also can help you close the more simple, if there's ever such a thing, cyber vulnerabilities. Hey, Microsoft, hey, Adobe, hey, Salesforce just put out a new patch. Automatically, I can set the automation to do that. That's the other benefit of these technologies too.
I think so, and I think Dr. Thompson alluded to that a few minutes ago, trying to close out some of those more low-level issues using these kinds of technologies. And I do want to, at some point, show my face in the industry again. So I won't say that patching and addressing vulnerabilities is easy or necessarily something that can be easily automated. But I do think that that's kind of, as an industry, what we're looking to do is take some of the things that are repetitive in nature, some of the things that are relatively low level, and try to automate those out as much as possible.
On the other hand, I'll just kind of play a little devil's advocate on the patching side. The move to the cloud, we gotta bring it up. That is part of that, the understanding that if you have an application, you have a system in the cloud, then you don't have to worry about that patching, because the patching is done by your cloud service provider. So does that make it easier? Maybe I'll just open up to the entire panel. Dr. Thompson was shaking her head, or kind of shaking her head.
Well,
as a cloud provider at IBM.
Well, I think cloud services offer patch services. Okay, I think this is important to really understand here. Is like I say, we don't have unlimited resources, like my peer says here. And I think what we need to do here is to commit it to let the expert do their job. And so if we are employing the cloud services, for security, there are many security services available. There are patching, system administration services available that would then free up you as an organization to really handle those lower tier workload, if you would. So then you can better focusing on how you defend your enterprise. So I think there's some opportunity that we can do. In addition to that, here is when we talk about artificial intelligence or threat intelligence, sharing would also help to eliminate the need for always require high-end cybersecurity professionals to do the job, because we can use those intelligence to help them to supplement their skill sets, if you would. In today's environment, the great shortage of cyber talent really require that type of capability to help.
Let's continue down this path around the cloud and some of these shared resources. I think a lot of federal agencies not only are moving to the cloud, there's new data coming out at the end of June from Office of Management and Budget, but then you also have a big push recently from OMB and now GSA on shared services. How does that change threat hunting, threat detection, incident response? Does that get at another layer of complexity, or does it make it easier? Dylan's shaking his head.
Way more complex, because there's so many more people in the loop now, right? You got, whether you're in AWS or Azure or IBM's cloud or whoever's cloud, you now have another party to worry about. And are they going to provide you the right logs and the level of visibility that you need to do your thing? Or, if you suspect a compromise on a machine, kind of to Ben's point on doing the forensics, some of these cloud providers don't let you get that level of visibility into the platform, right? You have your application, and that's your application, and that's all you see. What happens, what happens in the background is magic. We just provided you this platform for you to put it on, and you get no visibility. So if something were to happen, you're now reliant on them to provide you data, and they may or may not. Some of it's depending on your contract, on how they provide their service. So there's a whole level of complexity that happens when you get into the cloud.
I was just going to bring that up, the contracting piece, but Ben, jump in.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, I see a common misperception both in the public and the private sector that by moving to the cloud, you're mitigating your risk, you're making things safer for your environment, when, as Dylan mentioned, almost the opposite is true. What you're really doing is increasing your attack surface, okay? Because where before, that infrastructure that you now have in the cloud was behind your firewall, was behind your protective measures, now all of a sudden it's wide open to whoever can hit that IP around the world. Okay.
But let me jump in, because one of the promises of the cloud that we hear time and again in the community is, if I buy IBM is much smarter than my security operations center. IBM has much more resources than my security operations center. So they're inherently going to do a better job because their stock price depends on them doing a better job than me, agency X, who maybe can find somebody who maybe is the person hasn't been a systems administrator for 35 years and is still, so how do you balance that? Because that the promise of the cloud is yes, bigger attack surface, but better people, better technology. Right. All of you want to jump in on that. So quickly, and then we'll go to break.
That is part of the misconception. So a good deal of that depends upon how you're actually engaging with that cloud provider. So if the cloud provider like IBM is actually doing the infrastructure as a service to you, that's one thing. But if you're putting your own infrastructure up in a virtual environment, you have not mitigated any of those threats or the challenges that you have on managing a network.
That were usually on-prem.
That were usually on-prem. Now they're just up in the cloud. If you're using it as a SaaS platform where you just have access to an application, you really have no control over the security aspects of that application, and you're relying entirely on that provider to be 100% bulletproof on that.
I know, Mark, you want to jump in, so we're going to take a break. When we come back, you can get the first word on that next segment. You're listening to the panel discussion, Every Side of Cyber, Building a Nation-Scale Quick Reaction Force, sponsored by Raytheon on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.